On my parents' anniversary, I brought them a mysterious box. My mom rolled her eyes. We don't want anything from you. I whispered, you'll regret that. When my father finally opened it, the blood drained from his face. What he found triggered a fight that ended with police at our door. I never should have gone to that dinner. If I had ignored the invitation like I wanted to, none of this would have happened. But when my parents sent out a message about celebrating their 35th anniversary, skipping it wasn't an option, at least not if I wanted to see this through to the end. I arrived a little late, not by accident. The restaurant was the kind my mother, Marjorie, loved. Overly expensive, dimly lit, with a waiter who looked like he hated his life but had to pretend otherwise. White tablecloths, crystal glasses filled with overpriced wine. The kind of place where the air smelled like money, and the people inside acted like they'd never struggled a day in their lives. I spotted them immediately. My mother, perfectly poised, with her signature icy stare and a glass of red in her manicured fingers. My father, Walter, sitting stiffly beside her, checking his watch like he had somewhere better to be. My younger sister, Rachel, already looking uncomfortable, probably regretting showing up as much as I was. I walked toward the table, the small, carefully wrapped box in my hands. The second my mother saw me, she sighed loudly. "Oh, you actually showed up," she muttered, setting down her glass with a sharp clink. Then her gaze dropped to the box, and her lips curled in disapproval. "And what's that?" I pulled out a chair and sat down, resting the box beside me. "A gift," she scoffed. "We don't want anything from you." I smiled. Not a friendly smile. A tight-lipped, knowing one. "You'll regret that." Rachel shot me a nervous glance, already sensing where this was going. She was always the peacekeeper in the family, the one who tried to smooth things over, even when it was pointless. "Maybe we should just enjoy dinner first," she suggested carefully. I shrugged. "Sure, we'll enjoy dinner." But I knew the second my father opened that box, dinner would be the last thing on anyone's mind. The waiter came and took our orders. My mother, as usual, had some ridiculous request about her steak. Medium, but not too pink, and seasoned exactly how I like it, not how the chef likes it. My father barely said a word, ordering whatever was easiest, and Rachel just picked something simple, trying to stay out of the inevitable tension. We pretended to be normal for about 20 minutes. Marjorie went on about their upcoming cruise, describing every little luxury they'd be enjoying as if we were supposed to be jealous. Walter just nodded along, barely contributing. Rachel asked a few polite questions, but I could see her glancing at me every so often, nervous about when I'd finally make my move. Nobody asked how I was doing. "So," Rachel finally said, trying to fill the silence. "How's work, Alex?" "Work's fine." I stabbed a piece of steak. "Busy." Marjorie barely looked at me. "What is it you do again?" I smirked. "I'm a private investigator." "Oh, that's right," she said with fake interest. "Digging through people's trash, spying through windows. Must be fascinating." I leaned back in my chair. "It is." Rachel sighed. "Mom." "What?" Marjorie took another sip of wine. "I just think it's a little seedy, that's all." "I help people find the truth," I said flatly. "That's not seedy." Walter finally spoke, his voice low and measured. "Some truths are better left buried." I met his gaze. "Not this one." For a moment, the table went silent. Heavy, suffocating silence. Rachel fidgeted with her napkin. My mother sighed dramatically, already exhausted by my presence. I picked up the box, turning it slowly in my hands. "Well," I said, breaking the tension, "I think it's time for the gift." Walter's expression barely changed, but his grip on his fork tightened. Rachel glanced between us, her concern deepening. Marjorie rolled her eyes. "We don't want it." I slid it toward my father. "I think you do." He hesitated. His hands hovered over the box like he already knew it contained something he didn't want to see. But curiosity, fear, maybe, made him undo the ribbon and lift the lid. The second he saw what was inside, the color drained from his face. Marjorie frowned. "What is it?" She reached for the box, but Walter pulled it toward himself, his hands visibly shaking. Rachel peered over. Her breath caught. "Oh my God." Marjorie, growing impatient, yanked it from Walter's grip and finally looked inside. She went deathly still. The dining room around us was filled with the clinking of glasses, quiet conversations, the occasional burst of laughter from another table. But at ours, everything stopped. Marjorie's hand trembled as she set the box down, her face twisting into something between rage and panic. "Where the HLL did you get this?" I tilted my head. "You tell me." Walter rubbed a hand over his face, exhaling sharply. "Alex." His voice cracked slightly, something I hadn't heard before. "You have no idea what you've done." I leaned forward. "Oh, I think I do." Rachel looked at me, her expression desperate. "What is this? What does it mean?" Marjorie slammed the box shut. "This is ridiculous. This is nothing. It's meaningless." Walter looked at her, his face tight with something close to horror. "Marjorie, it's nothing," she repeated, voice rising. "Alex is just trying to stir up trouble. As always." She glared at me. You couldn't just let us have this one night, could you? I smirked, tapping the lid of the box. It's funny you say that, Mom. Because this, I gestured toward it, my voice sharp, is something you buried. Not me. Marjorie's face twisted. For the first time in my life, I saw something crack beneath her perfectly controlled expression. Walter swallowed hard, his hands shaking as he reached for his glass of water. Rachel kept shaking her head, looking between all of us like she was watching a BMB countdown to 0. And then my mother did something I didn't expect. She stood up, gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. Then she turned, fast, grabbed her purse, and stormed toward the exit. Walter hesitated, glancing at me, then at the box, then at Rachel. He looked defeated. But then, with a deep breath, he pushed back his chair and followed her. Rachel turned to me, eyes wide. Alex, what the HLL is going on? I stood up slowly, slipping my coat back on. They'll tell you, I said, nodding toward the door. Or you'll find out when the police get here. Rachel's face drained of color. The police? She whispered. I smirked, tossing a few bills on the table. This is just getting started. Rachel sat there frozen, eyes darting between me and the half-empty wine glasses on the table like she was trying to convince herself she'd misheard me. The police? She whispered again, her voice barely audible. I gave her a slow, deliberate nod. Her chair scraped against the floor as she shot up, grabbing my arm. Alex, what the HLL is in that box? I glanced down at the gift sitting innocently between the abandoned dinner plates. Even closed, it was like a time BMB ticking away in the middle of the table. You'll find out soon enough, I said. But I think you should hear it from them. Rachel's fingers tightened on my wrist. Alex, don't do this, she pleaded. If this is about Mom, if this is about how she treats you, just talk to me, okay? We can figure this out without whatever this is. I looked at her, really looked at her. Rachel wasn't like them. She was always the buffer between me and our parents, the only one who ever tried to keep the peace, to keep me from completely walking away. She still held on to some hope that things could be fixed. I almost felt bad for what was coming next. Almost. I wish it were that simple, I muttered. But it's not. I pried her fingers off my wrist gently, grabbed the box, and walked away. Rachel stood frozen for a second before she shook herself out of it and hurried after me. Alex, please. I ignored her and stepped outside. The night air was crisp, cutting through the suffocating warmth of the restaurant. I spotted my parents immediately. They were off to the side, near the parking lot, locked in a heated, hushed argument. Marjorie's face was twisted in barely contained rage, her perfectly done-up appearance cracking under the pressure. Walter looked drained, rubbing his temples, his shoulders slumped like he was already carrying the weight of whatever came next. They didn't notice me approaching. Not until I was a few feet away. Marjorie's eyes snapped to mine. You, she seethed, her voice dripping with venom. You had to drag this out into the open, didn't you? Couldn't just leave it alone. I crossed my arms. Funny. That's exactly what I thought when I found it. Walter let out a slow breath, like he was bracing himself. Alex, please. We need to talk. Privately. Marjorie whirled on him. You don't negotiate with him, Walter. He's doing this for attention. He's always been like this. Always stirring up problems. Always. I let out a short laugh. Oh, you think I'm the problem? I held up the box. Then why do you look so scared? She went silent. That told me everything I needed to know. Rachel finally caught up, panting slightly. Mom. Dad. What is going on? I watched them carefully. Walter's hands were trembling. Marjorie's lips were pressed into a thin, bloodless line. I opened the box. Rachel let out a sharp gasp. Her hands flew to her mouth. Walter went completely pale. His knees actually buckled, and he grabbed onto the back of a nearby bench for support. Marjorie didn't even blink. Her expression hardened. Her gaze flickered up to me. And then she did something that sent an icy chill down my spine. She smiled. Not a nervous smile. Not a guilty one. A slow, knowing, dangerous smile. And that's when I knew. She wasn't just scared of what was inside the box. She was planning something. Walter, on the other hand, looked like he was about to collapse. He turned to his wife, his voice barely a whisper. Marjorie, he rasped, eyes wide with something close to terror. What have you done? Rachel's voice shook. Mom. But Marjorie's cold stare never left mine. And then, very softly, she said, I hope you know what you've started, Alex. Because now, it wasn't just a family secret anymore. Now it was war. For a moment, none of us spoke. Rachel still had her hands over her mouth, her eyes flickering between our parents and the box, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Walter was gripping the back of the bench like he needed it to stay upright. And Marjorie, she just stood there, that eerie little smirk still playing at her lips. She wasn't panicked. She wasn't crumbling under the weight of some horrible revelation. No, she looked like she was waiting, calculating. That's when I realized she'd been preparing for this. She knew this day would come. Alex, Rachel's voice came out shaky, barely above a whisper. Where did you get this? I looked at her. I found it. Walter let out a shuddering breath. Where? I turned my gaze back to him. His voice wasn't angry. It wasn't even accusing. It was desperate, like he needed the answer to be anything other than what he feared. I went home, I said simply. Marjorie let out a quiet, scoffing laugh. She shook her head, like I was some petulant child throwing a tantrum. You mean you broke into our house, she corrected. Rachel's head snapped toward me. Alex, I went home, I repeated, voice firm. You know, that place I grew up in? The place you always pretended was perfect. My fingers curled tighter around the box. I figured after all these years, maybe I'd find some kind of proof that I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't making things up. And guess what? I opened the box again and held it out. I found it. Rachel's entire body stiffened. She took a slow, shaky step forward, finally working up the nerve to reach inside. Her fingers hovered over the contents for just a second before she finally pulled something out. A stack of old, yellowed photographs. Rachel flipped through them quickly, her face draining of color with each one. What? What is this? She whispered. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Walter was trembling. Jesus Christ. Rachel turned to him, her hands shaking as she clutched the pictures. Dad, Marjorie sighed loudly, folding her arms over her chest. This is ridiculous. Rachel snapped toward her. Ridiculous? She held up one of the photos. Mom, this is you. This is our house. What the HLL is going on? Marjorie tilted her head, still eerily composed. I don't know what you're talking about. Rachel let out a hollow laugh, shaking her head in disbelief. You. She turned the photo toward me. Alex, what are these? Who are these people? I took a deep breath. I don't know all of them, I admitted. But I know some. Rachel flipped to another photo. It was an old picture of our backyard. Our childhood swing set was in the background, but that wasn't what stood out. It was the man in the photo, middle-aged, unfamiliar, standing close to our mother, his hand resting a little too comfortably on her lower back. Rachel's face twisted in confusion. Who is this? Walter closed his eyes, his breathing shallow. Marjorie just smiled again. Tell her, I said, watching her. She didn't say a word. Rachel turned to our father. Dad. Walter opened his mouth, but no words came out. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. Tell her. I repeated, my voice colder this time. Rachel looked back at me, still waiting for an explanation. Alex, who is he? I exhaled slowly. He's the reason Dad spent our entire childhood drinking himself numb, I said. He's the reason Mom used to send us out of the house for hours at a time with no explanation. Rachel frowned, trying to piece it together. You mean, she was having an affair? I shook my head. Not just an affair. Rachel's lips parted slightly, her breath hitching. She was married, I said. Before Dad. Rachel blinked. What? I nodded toward the photos. Look at the dates. She hesitated, then flipped one over. Her brow furrowed. They're from the year before you and Dad got married. I continued, shifting my gaze toward Marjorie. Before you got pregnant with me. Rachel looked at Walter. Dad. His head was lowered, his fingers rubbing anxiously at his temples. He looked like he was about to be sick. Marjorie just sighed, as if she were exhausted with this whole conversation. Oh, for God's sake, she muttered. Rachel looked back at her. You were married before Dad? Marjorie lifted her chin slightly. Yes. Rachel's mouth fell open slightly. And you didn't think that was something you should have mentioned? Marjorie let out a soft chuckle, shaking her head like Rachel was being overdramatic. It wasn't relevant. Rachel let out a disbelieving laugh. Not relevant. Mom, what the HLL? Walter suddenly let out a short, bitter laugh. His shoulders were shaking slightly. Oh, it's relevant, he muttered, rubbing a hand down his face. Rachel turned to him again. Dad, what is she talking about? Walter exhaled heavily, his hands balling into fists. She didn't just leave him, Rachel, he said, his voice dripping with something I couldn't quite place. She made sure he disappeared. Rachel froze. Wait, you mean? I tapped the side of the box. Keep looking. Rachel's hands trembled as she flipped through the rest of the photos. Then she suddenly stopped. Her entire body went rigid. Her fingers curled tightly around the last photograph. Slowly, she turned it toward our mother. What? The HLL? Is this? It was a picture of our mother in the backyard, standing next to a man. The same man. But this time, his face was bruised. His hands were bound. And in the bottom corner of the image, a shovel, covered in dirt. Rachel took a shaky step back. Mom. Marjorie rolled her eyes. Oh, relax. Walter let out a harsh breath. Jesus Christ, Marjorie. Rachel's voice cracked. Is this a joke? Marjorie exhaled sharply, tilting her head. What do you want me to say, Rachel? The truth, I said coldly. Marjorie sighed, rubbing her temple. Fine. She gave a slow shrug. I got rid of him. Rachel's breath hitched. You KLL'd him? Marjorie's lips twitched. I solved a problem. Rachel looked at Walter in horror. And you knew? Walter's jaw clenched. I found out after. His voice was low, filled with resentment. After I was already stuck with her. Rachel's breaths were coming faster now. She looked at me, her expression a mixture of panic and disbelief. Alex, what do we do? I glanced down at the box, then back at our mother. Marjorie met my gaze, tilting her head slightly, assessing. Then she whispered, just loud enough for me to hear, "You don't want to do this, Alex." I smirked. "Mom, I already did." And that's when the sound of police sirens filled the night air. The sirens grew louder, flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the restaurant windows, bouncing across the parked cars. Rachel turned to me in shock. "Alex, what did you do?" I kept my eyes locked on our mother. What I had to. Marjorie didn't flinch, didn't panic. She just stood there, watching me with that same unreadable expression. If anything, she almost looked amused. The police cars screeched to a stop at the curb. Two officers stepped out quickly, hands hovering near their belts, not quite reaching for their GNS, but prepared for anything. One of them, a tall, broad-shouldered guy with sharp eyes, scanned the scene before stepping toward us. "Which one of you is Alex Calloway?" I raised my hand slightly. "That's me." The officer nodded and pulled out a notepad. "You called in a tip regarding a crime?" Rachel's head snapped toward me. "You called them?" Her voice wavered. "Oh my God." Marjorie let out a slow chuckle. "You really think this is going to play out the way you want?" I ignored her and turned back to the officer. "I have evidence," I said, motioning to the box still in Rachel's trembling hands. "It ties my mother to a crime." "A.M. Ryder." The officer's eyes darkened. He exchanged a quick glance with his partner, then took a step closer. "Sir, I'm going to need you to be very specific about what you're alleging." Rachel let out a shaky breath and held out the photographs. "These," she whispered. "These show. I think they show." She swallowed hard. "They show him. The man she was married to before our dad. And he's not around anymore." The officer took the photos, flipping through them carefully. His face remained neutral, but his grip on the edges of the pictures tightened ever so slightly. When he got to the final one, the one with the bruised man, the bound hands, the dirt-covered shovel, he let out a slow breath. Then, finally, he turned to Marjorie. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us." Rachel let out a tiny gasp. Walter squeezed his eyes shut like he'd been holding his breath this whole time. "But Marjorie?" She smirked. Not a single flicker of surprise or fear. "Of course," she said smoothly. She reached into her purse, pulled out a compact mirror, and checked her lipstick. "Let me just grab my coat." Walter opened his eyes, his voice hoarse. "Marjorie." She turned to him, that eerie smile still plastered across her face. "Oh, relax, Walter. It's just a conversation." She draped her coat over her shoulders like she was heading to brunch instead of a police interrogation. Before she turned away, she locked eyes with me. And then she leaned in ever so slightly. "Enjoy this while it lasts," she murmured, so quietly that only I could hear. Then she turned on her heel and strode toward the police car without so much as a glance back. Rachel's breathing was still uneven. "Alex," she whispered, gripping my arm. What if she gets away with it?" I swallowed hard, watching as the officers guided Marjorie into the back seat. "I don't think this is over," I muttered. And I was right, because not 10 seconds later, Walter let out a shuddering breath, ran a shaking hand over his face, and collapsed to his knees. Rachel screamed, "Dad!" I barely had time to react before she dropped down beside him, grabbing his arm, trying to keep him upright. Walter's face was ashen. His hands trembled violently, gripping at his chest like he was struggling to breathe. His entire body seemed to fold in on itself, as if the weight of the past was physically crushing him. "Dad, what's wrong?" Rachel's voice cracked. "Dad," he said in a sharp, shallow breath. "Marjorie," he whispered, his voice barely there. She warned me." Rachel shot me a panicked look. "Alex, do something." I was already moving, dropping to my knees beside him. "Dad," I said firmly. "Look at me." His glazed eyes flickered toward mine. His lips parted slightly. She said. His breath was coming in short gasps. If I ever told the truth, his body suddenly lurched forward. He collapsed against me. Rachel let out a choked sob. "Oh my God. Alex. Alex, we need help." I looked up wildly, scanning the area. The second officer, who had been standing near the car, must have noticed something was wrong because he was already running toward us. "What happened?" he demanded, dropping down beside us. Rachel was in full panic mode. He just collapsed. He was talking, and then the officer grabbed his radio. "We need an ambulance at Belmont Steakhouse. Possible cardiac event." Walter's body trembled against me. His grip on my arm tightened, just for a second, before going completely limp. Rachel screamed again. "Dad, no." The officer pressed 2 fingers against Walter's neck. His face remained blank, but I saw the flicker of something in his eyes. Something bad. Rachel clutched at his sleeve. "He's okay, right?" He's. The officer didn't answer. Instead, he turned toward his partner by the police car and gave a sharp nod. The partner immediately opened the back door and stepped toward Marjorie. Her expression didn't change, but she knew. She knew exactly what had just happened. I slowly looked back down at my father, at his slackened face, at his unmoving chest. Rachel's sobs grew louder, but I barely heard them. The blood in my ears was rushing too loudly. Because this wasn't just the past coming back to haunt us. This wasn't just old secrets unraveling. This was something worse. Something Marjorie had planned for. And now, I wasn't just trying to expose the truth. Now, I was out for revenge. Rachel was still sobbing, clutching our father's lifeless arm, while the paramedics rushed in, moving quickly to assess him. One of them shook his head slightly, and I knew. Walter Calloway was gone. Rachel was breaking down, gasping for breath between sobs, but I felt nothing. No sadness. No grief. Just cold, simmering rage. I turned my gaze toward Marjorie. She was still standing beside the police car, arms folded, watching everything unfold with that same detached expression. She hadn't moved, hadn't cried, hadn't panicked, because she knew. And that's when it hit me. Walter's death wasn't a coincidence. I replayed his last words in my head. She warned me. If I ever told the truth, my stomach twisted. Marjorie wasn't just ruthless. She was prepared. She knew this day would come, and she had planned for it. I took a deep breath, my mind already working, already shifting, already figuring out exactly how I was going to take everything from her. I wasn't going to KLL her. I wasn't going to hurt her. No, I was going to make sure she lost everything. The funeral was small. Walter had no real friends left. Over the years, he had isolated himself, drowning in alcohol and regret, letting Marjorie chip away at him piece by piece. Rachel and I sat in the front row of the church, dressed in black, both of us lost in our own thoughts. Marjorie. She sat off to the side, wearing an expensive black dress, a veil over her face, playing the role of the grieving widow perfectly. If I hadn't known better, I might have believed it. But I did know better. And I was ready. 3 weeks later, I executed my plan. I had spent every waking moment gathering information, making calls, meeting with people. I pulled every trick I had as a private investigator, every connection, every legal loophole. I dug deeper into Marjorie's past than I ever had before. And when I was ready, I filed my paperwork. Then, I called her. Alex, she said smoothly when she answered. To what do I owe the pleasure? I smiled to myself. I just wanted to let you know. It's over. She chuckled. Oh, sweetheart. You really think you won? I know I did. She sighed. Darling, listen to me. You can dig all you want, but you won't find anything that will hold up in court. You think I don't have lawyers? That I haven't spent years covering my tracks? There's no body, no weapon, no case. I leaned back in my chair. Who said anything about him, Ryder? Silence. Then, just the faintest waver in her voice. Excuse me. I smirked. I wasn't after the past, Mom. I was after your future. She stayed quiet, waiting. I continued, my voice calm, measured. You spent your whole life building a perfect image, didn't you? The elegant Marjorie Calloway. The socialite. The charity patron. The woman everyone admires. I let out a small laugh. But you know what people admire more than success? Another pause. Essendal, I said. And lucky for me, your whole life is one. I let the words sink in before I delivered the real blow. I had Dad's will revised, I said. Turns out, he never updated it after you got married. And since you never actually divorced your first husband, her sharp inhale told me she hadn't seen that coming. That's right, I continued. Your marriage to Dad? Never legal. Which means you have no claim to the house, or the accounts, or any of Dad's money. Marjorie's breath hitched. That's fraud, I finished for her. Bigamy. And don't worry, I made sure the right people saw the paperwork. The courts will be in touch soon. I could hear her breathing through the phone. Shallow. Uneven. She wasn't in control anymore. And I wasn't done yet. I also dug into your charity, I said casually. You know, the one you used to launder money? Don't worry, I sent all the files to the IRS. I'm sure they'll love taking a closer look. Marjorie finally spoke. You don't understand what you've done. Oh, I do, I said. I really do. And then I delivered the final nail in her coffin. By the way, I said, I found your first husband's family. Silence. Pure, deadly silence. You see, Mom. I continued, enjoying every second of it. They never stopped looking for him. And when I showed them the evidence, I let out a slow exhale. Well, let's just say, you have more than just the IRS to worry about now. She still didn't speak. For the first time in her life, Marjorie Calloway was speechless. I smiled. See you in court, I said. And then I hung up. In the weeks that followed, Marjorie's life fell apart. She lost the house. She lost the money. Her reputation was destroyed. The people who used to admire her turned their backs, pretending they had never known her. Her friends stopped answering her calls. Her name became tabloid gossip. Her face plastered all over the news as her fraudulent past came to light. She tried to fight it. She hired lawyers. She tried to manipulate her way out of it, like she always had. But it was too late. The world finally saw her for what she really was. Rachel and I sat side by side in court, watching as the judge ruled against her. She would never go to prison, not enough direct evidence for M. Ryder, but she would spend the rest of her life drowning in lawsuits, debt, and public humiliation. And that was enough. Rachel squeezed my hand as the gavel hit the desk. It was over. For the first time in our lives, we were free. And Marjorie? She was nothing. Just a name people whispered about in disgrace. Exactly what she deserved.